Everyone. Welcome. My name is Julie Pham, and I am the CEO and founder of Curiosity Base. And welcome to the series Respect in Practice, Decoding Job Cultures. We get to be with John Kennedy today, who is a conductor. So this is what does respect look like to maestros? So in this series, Respect in Practice, it's about understanding what does respect, communication, relationship building look like in different industries, in different professions. And I don't know about you, but John is actually the only conductor that I know personally. And so I know that it's that kind of mysterious, ooh, what do certain professions do, and what does communication look like in the work that you do? And so that's what we're going to get to dive in today with John. And so John, if you could just share a little bit about your background, and then we've got a series of questions and conversations to talk about respect, communication, and relationship building in your world.
Absolutely. It's a delight to be here and speak with you, Julie. Um, you know, I grew up in the Midwest in Minnesota. I fell in love with music and I began to pursue it seriously when I was a teenager. And so, I played percussion. I went to music school, conservatory, the Oberlin Conservatory, followed that up with grad work, and then moved to New York to sort of be part of the professional music scene. And so I've worked in music, as a percussionist. I've always wanted to compose music, and I've always wanted to conduct and lead, be an artistic leader. And I saw that for myself even when I was a teenager, that I didn't
Oh,
just want to do one thing really within the field. Like if there was a way to be a full musician, it was to be a practicing musician and someone who would create music too. And for me, I think I was drawn to music because I saw it as this incredible communicative tool, like this medium of communicating among people that involves our breath, our eyes, our ears, that sort of goes beyond sort of the mundane qualities of everyday communication into something that's like can be so beautiful and wonderful. And so it's wonderful to speak about it on those terms because I do think music is a form of human communication.
and so you knew that you wanted to be a conductor when you were a teenager?
Well, I knew that yes, I did. In fact,
Wow.
I did my first sort of conducting lessons when I was 16 as part of a program that I was exposed to, and I
Um,
really enjoyed it and wanted to take it further as I grew in my musicianship.
oh, and what is the path to becoming a conductor? Is this you're going to go on the conductor track, or how does that work?
Well, most conductors, like within the field that I'm in of classical music, opera, etc., they are players like me. Like they might have played violin or trumpet or flute, and they decided they wanted to learn conducting. So they have a background as a musician. Obviously, you don't just want to be able to do that without having those musical like bones that come from learning how to play. Um, but actually most conductors in the industry, shall we say, do follow a kind of particular educational path when they're young, of then entering competitions and winning
Um,
awards and going to summer programs and then sort of falling under the wing of a famous maestro and
uh,
being an assistant for a long time and that sort of thing. That is, in some respects, the quickest or best way to success. I took a harder road. I'm sort of an outlier, like I went to New York as a percussionist. I founded my own new music ensemble as an artistic director and said, so I'm going to be the conductor of this group. And then I learned conducting, also assisting other conductors, and also watching all the conductors I was working with. But I didn't really follow the traditional path when I was young. I didn't enter competitions and then get a manager. So,
so
you know,
even though you knew you wanted to be a conductor when you were young, you didn't follow the traditional path.
yeah, it's not really that I wanted to be a conductor. I've always looked at being a conductor as being part of my practice as a
Mm,
musician,
mm,
and so for me, actually getting my legs, to deserve the role,
mm.
so to speak, to stand in front of a group, and then also to be given the opportunity. It didn't come more for me until, shall we say, like midlife, in my, like probably in my early 40s. Yeah, that would be right. That I got my first, shall we say, big engagements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. So then it could also take a while to, because you could be that individual musician, and then it can take a while to become actually to conduct.
That's right. Yeah.
And
That's
actually, you know what I just realized is maybe you could actually explain, what does a conductor do? Because I realized we kind of just dove into how you became one, but I bet for the audience, for people who don't follow music a lot, it's just like, what does a conductor do?
Well, we wave our arms, right? We actually don't make any sound. So, there's a little bit of magic there, or sorcery, but it's leadership in all that implies. Just like both visually and gesturally, like in actually leading the music, interpreting it, but also like rehearsing and problem solving with a group of musicians in order to create, to realize the music together, so that
Mm,
we're not having a lot of accidents, shall we say, that we're being precise, we're being accurate, and we're at the same time we're giving a meaningful interpretation of what music is.
mhm,
And so it's a leadership role. It's both literally and figuratively too.
mm. And so I understand that you are actually conducting an opera right now, Omar, in San Francisco, and it's going to
That's right.
be playing until you said, oh, here's a picture.
Oh,
Here's a
that's
picture of you in action.
yeah.
And this is the cover of the San Francisco Chronicle, right? Could you just share a little bit about what we're seeing here?
Sure. This was an article that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle a few days ago, that was about changes in opera that are happening, in terms of what repertoire is being performed. And the person you see there with me is Rhiannon Giddens, the composer of the opera Omar, co-composer along with Michael Abels. And we're in a rehearsal there, in San Francisco Opera, where she's listening and watching what's happening on stage, and then whispering to me if she thinks something needs to be tweaked musically. So, and this opera Omar won the Pulitzer Prize this year. It's an absolutely amazing opera about Omar ibn Said, who was a Senegalese or Senegambian man who was captured and enslaved in 1807 and brought to the United States. An extremely literate scholar, in Muslim traditions, and was had an extraordinary life, that this opera tells. And we're doing it in San Francisco from November 5 through 21.
Wow. So if any of the listeners are in San Francisco until November 21st, then you should definitely
That's
check out
San
this
Francisco
opera.
Opera. Yeah, San
Yes.
Francisco Opera. Mhm.
And so that's interesting seeing that picture, because I want to ask you about collaboration. Because as a
Mhm.
conductor, there's a lot of leadership. You're communicating, and you're communicating with your arms, and yet there's also in that picture is the communicating with the composer too. So there are all these layers, these different people who you're communicating with. Can you talk about that? How do you foster that collaboration to get to the communication in real time, during the performance? It just
Right. Well, it's a long process. For instance, in the case of most operas, you would spend at least a month rehearsing, generally, or about a month to put it up on stage, especially in a big circumstance like this. And so, the process of collaborating with the composers, like if you are doing a new work, which this is, I mean, most operas might be composed by people who are no longer with us, and so there's
Mm,
standard ways of working, and the scores that have existed already, and interpretations that we're familiar with, that we build upon. In the case of working with living composers who are with us now, in my case, this has been a long process with Rhiannon Giddens and Michael Abels, because I was part of the team of people who helped commission the work and bring it to its premiere at the Spoleto Festival. And it goes back actually to like 2016, 2017, the whole process. of conceiving it and starting to build it, and then workshopping an opera, and the composers hearing what works and what doesn't work, and then gradually getting to the point where we all start to put it together, with a stage director, with choreographer, with designers, lighting, video, set, etc. And so it's the conductor is just, in some respects, one part of a really complex team of people putting on something in opera. and
Mm,
and then once we get to that rehearsal process, my work has involved, you know weeks, months of preparation with the score, of understanding all the vocal lines with all the singers, the different roles, the chorus, understanding all the different parts in the orchestra, the musical parts, and then having strategies for rehearsal. And then once you meet the actual people who are performing, you discover their strengths and weaknesses, what they need, what each singer might need, what some singers don't need and another singer does need from me as a conductor. Some
mm,
singers, they might need more help or cues, shall we say, in particular spots. And others have a certain security with the piece and they don't need as much information from me, you know. It's the same thing with the orchestra. There are parts of the music that might be more challenging in certain spaces or places in the music where a particular section needs my attention. That is, like, I might need to give attention to the violins here or the trumpets here in order to help them realize their entrances together and things like that. And so it's living and breathing, right?
mhm.
And it changes all the time too. Like, no performance is exactly the same. We try to stay consistent, but no performance is ever exactly the same.
So, as you were describing it, the word coach came to mind.
Uh-huh.
It really, as you were describing, because you're really listening for these different individuals, the
Yeah.
different individual musicians' strengths and their comfort, and trying to also probably boost their confidence in the piece
Hmm.
too.
Yeah.
And I had never thought about it that way, of just like how you as a conductor is actually really coaching and then also coming up with the game plan too of
That's
how this
right.
is going to align. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought of many sort of metaphors from sports relating to
Mhm,
music in the realm of performance,
mhm,
definitely. And in conducting, I do see my job, shall we say, as a facilitator,
mhm,
of being able to bring people to their best level.
mhm,
Um, and that involves not just the technical stuff, but also the sort of emotional and psychological stuff of creating an ethos or an ecology in the rehearsal space where people feel safe and supported, right?
mhm,
And 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 yeah, and there's also, like, in a big opera house like San Francisco Opera, there's a whole team of vocal coaches and
mhm.
music staff who help everyone in that regard as well.
So then there's also just the different resources with the different organizations that you're working with.
Yeah, it's like
Because if
having
you're
an
working
assistant coach.
right? Like if you're basically working with a big opera house, you're just like, "Oh, we have all of these." But if you're working with a really small one, then it could just
Mhm.
be you're doing more of
That's true.
that too.
Yeah. Mhm.
And and also, I mean, how much time do you get to actually practice and get to be with the musicians before the and rehearse before the show starts?
Every situation is different,
Mhm,
but generally speaking, you know, I mean, like, for an orchestral program, like a
mhm,
symphony, there you might have between 1 and 4 rehearsals,
mhm,
depending on what the repertoire is, what the circumstance is, what the project is, and the budget, that sort of thing. So not a lot of rehearsal, generally speaking, for orchestra programs.
mm,
But for opera, as I mentioned, we might spend a month preparing it, like with the stage rehearsals with the singers, just using a piano. And then
mm.
finally bringing in the orchestra and all the technical elements and putting it on stage, with less time, frankly, than one usually would hope for.
Mm. And you said you creating this space, the safe space for people too. How do you do that when you have such a short period of time?
Staying remarkably efficient and and communicating always with people, working quickly but optimistically, and when problems occur, fixing them right away.
Ah,
You know.
this is, and then also what you were just saying, I'll just comment on it, the difference of working with a live composer, a
Hmm.
living composer versus one where it's just you're just interpreting someone's work. That's quite different too. I hadn't thought about that layer.
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, these two composers have not been around the process very much. Like
Mhm.
that photo of Rhiannon with me, that was her dropping in to our process for just one day.
Mm,
So she's not there the whole time. She's let go of the piece. She's composed it.
mm,
She and Michael have composed it. It's their baby. They've given it to us to interpret it and perform. But we still want their input.
mm,
And so she very generously came to San Francisco for a day to listen and, mostly to talk to the singers, about their roles and help them think about how to interpret them.
mm. So
Mhm.
then, okay, so you have this short period of time. Do you how to get ready for that collaboration? Do you kind of just go straight into the music and kind of jamming, or do you have conversations beforehand? How do you set that
You know,
space?
It's interesting in the world of professional classical music. Everyone is expected to be at performance level from the first rehearsal. You're expected to be ready. You're expected to know all the notes and be able to just go. And so there's no real teaching involved, right?
Mhm,
If someone shows up not knowing the music, they might be replaced pretty quickly. And so and even within a professional orchestra going into a first read, you expect that everyone has looked at the music in advance. And so that means that from the very beginning we can really make music and do it
mhm,
and
mhm.
and, and understand each other.
So it sounds like then when you by the time that you get to that point, you're really more like reacting and to one another and like kind of learning how to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ah,
There's so much information being exchanged in music when you have, over 100 people performing, and it's constantly changing, the volume, the timbre, the balances of things. And so as a conductor, that's what I'm working with.
mm. So let's move into understanding this. How do you communicate? How do
Mhm.
you communicate? So how do you communicate with the musicians? How do the musicians communicate with one another? And then
Mhm.
also, you also have your audience, and
Yeah.
how do you communicate with them? And then there's also the organizer, the admin, like the people who are funding all of this. But there's so many different layers. Like how do you communicate? How do you build relationships with them?
Well, I'll answer the first part of that first, like about the musicians. I could wax rather romantically about the beauty of music and how it's like this unspoken level of communication, right? Like musicians communicate among themselves. I mean, professional musicians are so experienced, like they've done this their whole lives, and people develop shared practices that are incredibly sophisticated, like as on a human level, like almost you know like weather, like the natural world, being able to breathe together, being able to anticipate just the feel of drop in time together, so that 80 people will all of a sudden go, "Ah," that kind of thing. And these people are so expert that they can do that. And with a conductor, one wants to communicate as much as possible through gestures and
Mm,
invitation, and to not have to stop so much. I mean, I learned as a young musician, as a player in orchestras, that the conductor who has to stop all the time and explain everything with words isn't as strong as the conductor who can explain with the hands while one works, so to speak. Instead of stopping to say, don't play so loud there, give a gesture to help the musicians know that. Instead of saying, let's phrase this way, just do it with your hands. And
mm.
so that's part of the process, certainly. And in terms of the audience, I mean,
Well, and actually, John, before you go into the audience, I want to
yeah.
clarify something here. Is there then, because you're communicating so much with your hands, is there something universal among conductors? Is it like a sign language? Or is it, oh, the musicians have to adjust to what the conductor's particular hand gestures are?
Yeah, I mean, there's general accepted practices, obviously, that just in terms of like beat patterns and things like that, like what is four and what is three, one hopes, and so, um, but but yeah, I think through common practice and even orchestras seeing hundreds of different conductors. I mean, musicians having experienced hundreds of different conductors in their lifetime, they understand how to respond to people individually as well. Um, so
Hmm.
that's
Huh.
that.
So yes, it's really about learning how to communicate with your hands versus them with words. That's really fascinating. Huh.
That's a big part of it.
And
Yeah,
then and musicians do that with but they're not communicating with their hands. How did they
with their
musicians?
instruments.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
With their sounds and there's a lot of communication that happens in an orchestra within each section, like the winds and the brass. They just learn to breathe with each other, even if they're sitting next to each other, right? So they're not looking at each other. People might have someone on the right and left of them, but they land together. And
mhm,
the same thing with strings and bowing. They'll be in a rank or a row where they can see each other and try to match each other that way.
mhm. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's
Sure.
talk about how do you communicate with your audience?
Well, I mean, that's the exciting part too, in terms of um, reaching folks. I mean, it's our goal in the process of rehearsing something and preparing music and finding it worthy of sharing, shall we say, of programming it and giving devoting resources and dollars to it to put it on a stage. It's our goal that we prepare the most compelling performance in term that shares the integrity of the music, what its communicative message may be, both musically and culturally, shall we say. I mean, I'm a big believer that music is a reflection of culture. It's not just this pure artistic object. It's not entertainment. It's something that tells us a lot about ourselves. And opera, particularly as a storytelling medium, what is the story of this opera? Why are we presenting it now at this time in history? What's its meaning to culture today? And so just in even the basics of preparing music, we want to go beyond that and provide the audience with a performance that not only is, shall we say, musically meaningful and or pleasurable, but also makes people think.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. How do
Yeah.
you deal with audience feedback? You get the reviews the first night, they're critical, or they're like, there's lots of praise, or there's lots of like, oh, and how do you as a conductor take that?
Well, you have to have a very thick skin to do this kind of thing, because even even within the hallways of the building, and working with hundreds of musicians, not everybody is going to like everybody,
Mhm, mhm,
and so at a certain point, you just have to stop worrying about that. And in terms of like critics and audience, there are always going to be some people who don't get it.
mhm,
There just are, like, or get it the same way you do, the way
mhm,
I do, right?
mhm,
And I always tell myself too, whenever I'm like feeling maybe a little paranoid or shall we say like, oh, someone didn't like that. I just have to remind myself that like the most admirable musicians that we may hold up, you know, like as just the most brilliant, people will criticize them all the time.
mhm, 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 mhm,
There is not an amazing musician on this earth who has not been criticized by others, and so or critiqued.
mhm.
We all deserve critique. We can all get better,
Mhm,
and so I don't take it too seriously, frankly.
mhm. So let's move on to we've been talking about communication. Let's talk about relationship building.
Yeah,
And so you've got all of these musicians, they're professional, they can start perform from the get-go. Do they actually try to get to know each other, or is it kind of like, no, it's just the time that we're together? Like what is that? Like in my world, we call it team building, right? But like in your world,
sure.
what would that is it What does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, certainly, like on the one hand, you have orchestras which are very established, and people maybe, people become tenured. They've earned their job. They get to stay there for many years. And so you'll have a culture in an orchestra of people. Some people may have been there 30 years, and then they're the new people who are in the process of just arriving and earning their tenure. And they do become very familial. And certainly, like in any family, there can be um, there can be rifts,
Hmm. Hmm.
there can be tensions, and that those tensions can sometimes play out musically by, shall we say, failure to cooperate, or just like microaggressions, like, no, I'm not going to breathe with you here. No, no, I'm not going to adjust my intonation to yours. I'm doing it right and you're doing it wrong. I mean, these are all things we see. Within the opera world, what's always really kind of fun, and it can be endearing too, is a new cast.
Mm.
In a new city, people coming from different places, different, maybe coming from all over the world for a project, so that it's a little bit like of a 1 month summer camp of preparing an opera,
Mm.
and that's a team building exercise for sure. Of also understanding the power dynamics that can exist, where, like, if anyone is sort of trying to exercise a certain level of privilege that might be unfair to others, like in the rehearsal process, that kind of thing, like, oh, I need tomorrow morning off, but everyone else has to
The
be there.
diva, right? Or
Yeah,
like the Irish.
thank you. I wasn't going to say it. Yeah,
Oh, so this is so interesting thinking about the difference of a group of musicians that work with each other regularly
yeah.
versus the ones that are coming together for a special production. And
Mhm.
then and also I guess with an orchestra that's together regularly, they will have sometimes guest conductors, and they also have regular conductors,
Right.
right? And so sometimes it's actually as the guest conductor, the conductor has to build the relationship with this group of people in an orchestra that already have an established relationship with each
Exactly.
other. So you are actually trying to, when you go in and guest conduct, you're trying to figure out what are the existing dynamics.
Totally. Yeah, you've identified a really important part of the process. And I mean, that's certainly something that we experience in every sort of first rehearsal with an ensemble, is like, you're simultaneously showing them who you are and what you want, but at the same time, I'm trying to do a lot of information gathering about the dynamics within the orchestra, and trying to see, shall we say, who the leaders are, people who are the leaders who are actually proactive about
Mhm.
their role, others who may be, sitting back a little bit in their role. And boy, you learn a lot in the first rehearsal.
Yeah, John, it sounds like you have to do that really quickly
Yeah,
to be
you
able to
do. I
read
mean,
the
yeah, and it's
musician.
something that one gains with experience. I will be the first to admit that as a young conductor, my ears would be peeled, to learn all I could about, the music, the playing that was happening. But my attention wasn't, shall we say, focused enough on sort of the social dynamic. And that's really important in an orchestra too, is understanding who the people are in their musical personalities.
How did you learn that? How did you learn that you need to
Just
focus on that?
experience, yeah.
Okay. So that's not the kind of thing that they teach you in, or
Well,
like did the
they don't necessarily teach you about it, but I mean, conductors do talk about it,
um,
and if you talk to another conductor who's worked with a particular group of people, they might have some thoughts for you in that regard.
mhm,
Like, if we share if we share some information with each other. Yeah.
all right. So
Mhm.
audience, if you have any questions, please do type them in. We are gonna This is so interesting. I'm like, oh, I want to. I'll actually ask one more follow-up question before we move to respect on this,
Yeah.
which is, do you as a conductor have a preference of working with people who are newly forming, or those are kind of established and you are there to figure out the dynamics and how you can bring out the best in them?
I love it all. I mean, any opportunity to make music with groups of people is wonderful. And I mean, there are different kinds of challenges, and I enjoy both. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. So now moving on to respect. So, John, you were a maestro, right? You have that's the
Yeah.
title of the
Yep.
conductor, and it's just so there's this image of maestro that suggests that respect is given to the conductor, but not necessarily the other way around. Could you tell us about this, the validity of this perception?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of a standard sort of trope about classical music, and that would actually was part of the culture of the field for many generations. I think, like, if anyone has seen the movie Tar from last year, it sort of portrayed what I would call the maestro myth, in which that character Tar, who was a female conductor, aside from all the other dynamics of that film, which I won't get into, just the very premise of the film was that she, as a maestro, was like a genius, and like
Mm.
some sort of special human being who could just go before an orchestra and be like all powerful. And that is an image of the maestros in history. And certainly, like, if we go back into early 20th century and mid 20th century culture in classical music, maestros were treated, shall we say, as all powerful,
Mhm.
and they often treated musicians very poorly, would insult them, would exert the power of the podium like a tyrant, you know. and there are still some living conductors who are of that tradition, who like are notorious for never speaking to anyone. Like, if they were to be in the elevator leaving the theater with other people, they wouldn't speak to them, and they would expect to be called maestro.
Oh.
Most conductors today don't live by that, ethos anymore. You look at the younger generations of conductors, who understand a more collaborative way of working, and the term maestro, I mean, master in Italian, your teacher, and it's not necessarily, something that implies anything autocratic, but it conveys a kind of respect. But I think, in some places, like, I people will sometimes say to me, "Do you want to be called Maestro or John?" And I'm like, "Whatever you prefer. You can call me John." And some people will call me Maestro John, right? And in certain houses too, there's a culture where they want to call you Maestro, and it's just because they want to create that balance,
Mhm.
and so it's not necessarily about the individual person so much as just so that it's understood, like as part of the chain of facility, not even a chain of command, but a chain of collaboration, that this person is the maestro and we have to consult.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it makes me think. So part of this, part of the series, respect and practice, is tying back to the communication framework that Curiosity Base created, 7 forms of respect. And one of the things that we talk about is power dynamics. Hierarchy is a dimension that will impact respect, and that hierarchy actually isn't bad. It sets order, right? And so in your case, it's just, well, no, the maestro, that is a certain order in this, and it's not good or bad. It's just is.
exactly, because we couldn't do the music without a maestro.
Mhm,
There has to be someone fulfilling that role.
mhm. And
Yes.
so you said that this has changed, that you've seen this change in your lifetime, in your career. What's caused that change in terms of how the maestro is seen in terms of respect in that?
Orchestra musicians.
Really?
Really. I mean, I have to give them the credit, because I mean, obviously there's cultural change that happens too in the way we all interact, but also, orchestra musicians asserting their power, their own individual strength, their own opinions. I think that's helped change the culture a lot. And also their lack of tolerance for being mistreated, even with particular kinds of conductors. And so that over time has shifted things. But also, I mean, we're in a cultural age now too, where people understand that autocratic leadership is not productive. It doesn't get beautiful musical results necessarily either. There's a kind of performance that might be commanded and very strict and shall we say technically, observant to whatever the conductor's doing. It may not be the most communicative or emotive performance. And I think for many musicians today, there's an understanding of how it's a collaboration between all kinds of leadership, from the podium, from within the orchestra, from the stage, from singers. That leadership becomes something that's a collaborative process, even in the live effort of making music.
That makes me think about how, so sometimes think about organizational cultures. It's like, oh, the leader, the CEO, whoever's at top dictates everything. And yet what you're describing is, well, actually this case, the frontline workers, the orchestral musicians can say, no, we want this, and to push back and to actually create change. And it just makes me think about how how employees, or like in this case musicians, can say, hey, we want change. It's not just about waiting for that change to come from the top, that we are actually all responsible for the kind of change, the kind of culture that we want to see too.
That's right. That's right.
And it shows like how that actually respect can evolve as well.
Yeah. And I mean, to be sure, it's also a conductor's job and an artistic director or an artistic leader's job to create a culture where that's possible.
Yeah. So let's move on to 7 forms of respect in music, right?
Sure.
And so what do you think there are? So there are the 7 forms of respect that we use this acronym PICA, PPICCAA: procedure, punctuality, information, candor, consideration, acknowledgement, and attention. What do you think are the top 2 to 3 forms of respect that are really prioritized in your world, in music, and by conductors?
Yeah, first of all 7 of those forms of respect are really important and get exerted, within a complex institutional structure and within the complex format of making music. For music, I think in the way we work, it tracks very closely to what like I did your quiz, to determine my own. I think it tracks pretty close towards procedure. Like we have a strong understanding of procedure, because that's so much about recognizing everyone's professionalism. Like we're in the room together, and establishing trust. Like these are just common practices of procedure so that we can then do our work. And then really what's so important is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement becomes making clear what is successful, what is working. It also is it's encouragement. It's sharing feedback that is telling people that the music making is really working. So those 2 sort of stick out for me. The others are still part of the process.
Yes, with this, we always say it's not that any are less important. It's just that what are the ones that prioritize? And can I really see in procedure, because everyone has their specific role. Like literally, they are playing a specific instrument. So one musician wouldn't tell another one, hey, play it this way. It's just And as you were describing earlier, when you're talking about the breath and hearing everyone, I was also thinking attention must be really important too.
Oh, it's so important. Yeah, I mean, it's without saying. That's what one of the most beautiful things in music making too is the locked in sense of so many people's attention. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, well, with that, I mean, John, I feel like we could keep talking, and I have so many questions, but I know that here we have what do you wish CEOs and other so-called leaders can learn from the orchestra pit in terms of selflessness?
What a great question. Making music does involve selflessness, right? Like you're taking a page of music that's in front of yourself with all the notes being written, and you're supposed to realize or create another version of those notes. And basically sublimating everything you've learned in all your training to be as accurate as possible in playing that particular music. And so orchestral musicians have to do that from, I mean, all musicians really who are playing notated music like that, and whether they're playing an instrument or singing, they have to bring this level of selflessness to it, that like I am here to realize this creation of someone else. And then, or within an orchestra, there are many more layers to that, in the sense that like you might have 12 violins playing the same music. And one of them is the section leader, the concert master, or the principal second violin, etc. And but all 12 of those people have to play the same part together, and with the bowings and the interpretation and the thinking that the conductor and the concert master and everyone have put into how it's being played. And so within that selflessness of playing specific material in a certain way, we're still asking these people to also be expressive and to share their musicianship, um, and I mean, I think that's wonderful. To me, it's not like the process of music making. It's like it's this glorious thing of human beings coming together with selflessness to realize something beautiful. And I think that's what makes music, like when we see big pieces of music like that being performed, like with such incredible excellence, it's really moving to me, because it to me it shows human beings collaborating and communicating on such a sophisticated level, and sharing the same intention, sharing the same goals, and all of us, um, doing that with a submersion of self to a certain extent.
John, I feel like we can learn, other workplaces can learn so much can
I
learn
agree.
so
I
much
think so.
from what you do as a
From
conductor and from a
musicians.
musician, so that
Yes.
because you have to really serve and interpret all of these different musicians, and yet everyone has to play in sync. And I think about how in the workplace sometimes it's about individual performers and they're being pitted against one another, and what would happen if we were just, well, look, we all have to perform in unison, and this is not just about one individuals can be expressive, and yet it's not about us, it's not about me as the individual. So that's really beautiful. I'm taking away a lot about how we could be more collective, united
Hmm.
in our work.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, John, it's been such a pleasure to get to chat with you today. And for those who are more interested in learning about John's work, there is this really beautiful, you have this beautiful website that you can scan this QR code and learn more about what John is doing, and also learn more about what leadership in music and how that can translate to other areas of our life as well. So, John, thank you so
Hmm.
much, and thank you, audience, for being here with today for the respect and practice, and getting to learn about what respect means to maestros. And continue to connect with us so that you can follow us on the series and get to learn about other interesting job cultures as well.
Thank you, Julie.